We're going to start now. It will allow people to continue trickling in, but we're going to get going. So I'm so excited to be here today and announce and introduce you to this panel today of all these fantastic people here to have a panel discussion on affordable living with youth. This panel is being moderated by Mark Beckles. You heard him speak earlier. He is the Vice President of Social Impact and Innovation at RBC. Joining him on the panel, we have Robert Bernard, co-founder of Youthful Cities. We also have Joyce Cho, sorry if I said that wrong. Oh, she's not here, I'm kidding. Oopsies. Just joking, haha, funny. Okay, so we also have Laura Kathler, Executive Director of National Alliance of Children and Youth. We have Sharif Mahdi, the Executive Director of the Students' Commission of Canada, and Terrence Hamilton, Domestic Policy Specialist at UNICEF.
Thanks so much, Katie. So just for some context for today's panel discussion, and again, back to one of the presentations we had today around about being broke. I will never forget that. This panel discussion is really focused on affordability, and RBC partnered with Youthful Cities a number of months ago to create the Real Affordability Index. And of course, the index and the research that Robert's team led really has captured the fact that we have an issue in Canada, that Canadian cities are no longer affordable for young people. And of the 27 cities across Canada that the index researched, the average monthly deficit for a young person is $750. Now, I'm going to assume that all of you in this room understand the concept of a deficit, meaning you're borrowing money just to live, which is frightening. More importantly, the cost of living and financial challenges that young people are facing is really big, and it is one that all Canadians are facing, but young people in particular. So that the purpose of today's panel discussion is not to reiterate what you already know, that the cost of living is higher than ever for way too many Canadians, but that we need to think about how we develop solutions and how we inspire hope from a policy perspective, from an innovation perspective, from a technology perspective, to cross-sector collaboration. And in that context, your input is really, really important. For those of you here virtually and certainly live, you can actually add your questions and comments via the chat as well. We hope to take one or two of the questions that are coming in through that medium. So with that, I'm going to just jump to my chair and begin to get into some questions with our esteemed panel. These are folk that are doing really important work, and again, just give them all a round of applause before we get started. Test 1, 2. Alrighty. So, Robert, you are first up at bat because you're the one that actually did the research that has led to this this conversation that we are going to have today. And very specifically, what are some of the challenges that young people in Canada are facing related to financial well-being and affordability of living today? And so thinking about the affordability index that you just published, what are some of the sort of top-line issues that the research has uncovered?
See if this works, and it works. First of all, shout out to the We're Broke team, Students' Commission. Woo! Great job. I mean, it's tough to celebrate we're broke. And I think that's one of the reasons we did the work with young people across Canada, was just to say, okay, let's sort of figure this out. We've all heard that young people are not finding the affordability in cities. We've got all these stories, but let's try to put some facts to it. So I think, in answer to your question, we looked at sort of four main areas. So first of all was, can young people live? Can they afford housing? Can they afford food? And I think that the group today sort of talked about the fact is neither of those is affordable. We also talked about that they need to be able to afford to develop the skills to get jobs. So part of affordability is to make sure that young people can have an income, and that income is driven by can they get the education and skills to get full-time jobs. Anyone want to? I'm sorry. Are we have ask questions of the audience too?
You can if you want to. Sure.
You know, like, who wants? What percentage of young people in Canada have a full-time job? Who wants to guess that? I mean, it should be 100%, right? Yeah. 30% would be really tragic for Canada's future, but it's 49%. So half of young people who are employed have a part-time job. So that's a really tough spot to be if you're only making a little bit of money towards the. So I think getting those skills is number 2. Number 3 is moving around your city. Costs a lot to move around. That's, I love the video, by the way. If you can even afford a car, it costs you a lot to run it. If you can't afford a car, it's costing a lot to move around. And if you can't move around, you can't actually get the jobs. So that's a tough one. And then the 4th area is around actually enjoying your city. And that's almost the saddest one for me, is that young people should be able to actually have fun. You should be able to afford a concert. You should be able to go and enjoy a night out at a restaurant. You should be able to, afford a coffee. So those are the 4 areas that we really focused on, and each one of those is under pressure in Canada today.
And not getting better anytime soon.
Well, let's hope this conference and others to come will start to change the tide.
There's the hopefulness right there. So Laura, thinking about the work that you do and thinking about the comments that Robert just spoke to and the areas where we're seeing challenges, what do you think has changed over the last 4 years in particular that has made this situation that much more acute for young people?
Well, I mean, we all just went through one of the biggest crises that many of us hope to ever experience. And I think that COVID-19, the pandemic, really reshaped how we experience the world in a lot of different ways. But the cost of living, the increased costs and inflation, and how whether that inflation is real or inflated by corporations is a big question that a lot of us spend time asking. And so all of these changes in the cost of living were growing slowly over time, but that increase over the last 4 years has skyrocketed in a way that doesn't match how much people are getting paid in a job. We also know that employment rates, there's not a lot of jobs for young people. No one wants to hire young people, less and less all the time. Jobs that young people that you all used to have are now being held by a lot of adults, because they now need part-time jobs to also compensate for their full-time jobs just to survive. And so how do we make sure that those spaces are not being co-opted by people who do need more income, but are now taking opportunities away from youth, I guess.
So what we know is that financial well-being is a complex problem with various factors playing a role. And Robert and Laura, you just spoke to a couple of them. Some include increased, prices for rent, stagnant wages if you can get a job, lack of access to skills and education, increased costs around mobility, and so on. And one of the key challenges that we're seeing is related to salaries. Salaries and wages are not keeping pace with the cost of living in Canadian cities. And in all of the cities indexed, the minimum wage is not a living wage, and gaps range between $2 and $10. When it comes to policy development and measures, what are some of the policy work that is happening in Canada that is affecting minimum wage? In fact, more policy work needs to be done in Canada to address the minimum wage. Terrence, what are your thoughts around that?
So I actually think there's quite a lot of policy work that's being done around minimum wage, but it is not necessarily to increase it. So when we look at the newspaper every morning and there's these stories about inflation and the cost of living, they're talking about the wages that people like you earn in the market economy, but they're talking about it in a political way that takes the focuses the attention elsewhere outside of the minimum wage that young people are earning. So when we ask UNICEF has a really cool digital polling platform where we talk to young people on a regular basis. It's called U Report. And so when we ask young people, what is it that would help you? One of the things they say is a higher wage. Like in some ways, it's not actually that complicated, but the way that the debate gets framed allows for this the conversation to be steered away from the question of minimum wage. For example, Ontario had planned to increase its minimum wage, and then they canceled that plan. That is a political decision that is directly taken against young people in a young generation who are more likely to be earning minimum wage. And so I was really struck, Robert, when you said, we shouldn't be celebrating you saying we're poor or how broke we are. I get where you're coming from because it's not good that you're broke, of course. But I think that there is something to celebrate it in that, because the fact that you are broke as young people is a political problem. And you standing up here on the stage and saying I am broke and talking to your friends and your relatives and telling them about the financial struggles that you're experiencing, that's the first step towards being able to come together as young people and those of us who support you to change something about it. So I do celebrate you saying we're broke, even though I don't celebrate the fact that you are.
Well said, Terence. There's often been conversations around sort of linking, the skills gaps that young people, quote unquote, have with the wages that they earn. And whether that sort of exacerbates the issue or not, we can talk about. But in terms of the role that charitable organizations can play in ensuring that, young Canadians have the right skills and competencies and capabilities to be able to compete for the right jobs at the right level of income, to Laura and to Sharif, what are your thoughts on that?
You want to go first?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I think a lot about, I spent a lot of time thinking about this question actually. And the first thing that came to my mind is, why should a better pay be the goal? Why is not decent work, enjoyable work? Why is that not the goal? And why is better pay not available to young people, regardless of what sector they choose? It's a struggle we face a lot in the nonprofit sector. We create so much opportunities for young people to come and work in our organizations, but they leave as they grow older. And these voices that they share with us, we need them in the nonprofit sector, but our wages are not keeping up with young people's need to survive and thrive in our communities. And so we need to start looking at not just encouraging you all to find better pay, but challenging organizations, regardless of your sector, to have access to equitable pay across sectors, to challenge your employers to have those opportunities, to challenge funders in your organizations to make sure when we fund jobs, that our jobs are, for young people, exist at a level that you can survive in and want to stay here, so that those investments that we make in our organizations are now investments in the young people in our communities, and we're not appropriating the heart of the work that we do in that space. Youth-serving organizations are places where young people go to employment training, they build skills, they learn, they build community. These organizations are doing that work. They're already doing it. But we need more investment in these organizations to grow those and to hire wonderful people like all of these young people here to carry on that legacy moving forward.
So as a quick follow-up to that, do you feel, or do you think that corporate Canada understands and values the work that youth-serving organizations do in terms of building the skills and capabilities of young people? Do you think they value it? Do you think they devalue it? What is your thought?
I think that I think that they don't understand it, I think, is the big part of the part of the challenge. You know, we talked about the 4 pillars we respect. I think that there is a level of respect to the work being done, but I think that there's not a lot of listening happening to the sector leaders who are creating space to listen to young people, and I think that there's a gap in understanding about the value in our human resources that exist within this sector, and the need to invest in the staff organizations, in the organizational capacity of these spaces, so that we can take our expertise and the expertise that's shared with us from young people to make sure that the work we're doing aligns with what young people need, and so that they can either stay with these organizations and become the leadership so that they are one day sitting here, or that we provide them a pathway to find out their own passion, and that it's not always just, I need to move to a job that pays me better. Robert was talking about that need to play and go to theater and have dinner, and that's part of our work too. Work should be spaces where we can, you know, laugh and find joy, should that be something that we want as part of our work. And youth-serving organizations and charitable organizations and nonprofits are great places for that to happen, because we have the tools and knowledge and understanding of young people to lift them up if they need support.
Thanks so much. Sharif, you lead this wonderful organization called Students' Commission of Canada. Any thoughts on what you heard?
Lots of thoughts and lots of feelings. Yes. So I would just start off by, I think there's a couple of examples that have kind of popped into my mind that from a system level perspective would help us to think through this challenge and problem. The first one is just this perception amongst folks who are not in the nonprofit or charitable or youth serving sector, this perception that these organizations, this mindset, this 19th century mindset of charity, which is all about helping others, versus as a key place for people to grow skills, to serve, to better the economy, to contribute to the GDP. That is missing in a lot of the conversations that we sometimes have with all sorts of funders. And so when you put in place in a funding proposal, a 5-year funding proposal, cost of living increases, it's the first thing that gets removed by the funder. They say that's your problem. But as a charitable organization, we're actually we don't have as many options in terms of generating funding as might be possible in the corporate sector. And so how are we supposed to pay our staff, not just minimum wage in some cases, but living wage in the communities that they serve? Once inflation started ticking up, we started putting in some meaningful cost of living increases into our budgeting and planning. And they all got taken, there's, I'm not gonna name names, but there was 10 different funding applications where the budget was reduced, and it was clear that the cost of living increases were taken out of that. So if I'm doing a 5-year program, which is really important to have multi-year investment programs, if I'm doing a 5-year program and you're expecting that the wage that I propose for this project coordinator is gonna be the same for 5 years, that's a system level support that I think we need from funders. We need them to understand that because of who we are as an organization, this funding is going to have to go up over the years, right? So we've tried to be creative in how, we don't, if it's a $1.5 million over 5 years, we put less of that in the first year and more of that in the five years, and try to say most of that money should come in 5 years. There's ways that we as charities have been able to do that. The second example that I'd like to share is just we have a lot of diverse young people in the room today, a lot of diverse young people in our programs who a number of them require different types of supports or funding supports. There's some folks who require supports to make them be able to live day to day. There's some folks who are on disability and require them to live through the disability payments. And we've had to kind of be creative to ensure that we're not, that by giving them a job, we're actually, which we can only pay at a certain rate, that we are not taking away from those critical payments that are clawed back whenever they get a job. So we've also had to be creative about how that works. And, we would appreciate, I think one of the things that we've heard from young people on this topic is the concept of honoraria, and like there's some folks in our network in our program who don't want a job, but who want their time to be compensated. But if they get honoraria and they're at every event and they keep getting honoraria, that becomes taxable at a certain amount, and that might actually result in them losing some of the really critical income supports that they have to live. I don't think that's fair. I think that if someone is not wanting to have a job, not wanting to have a day-to-day 9-to-5 job, but is still getting critical skills through a week of Canada We Want, or a youth advisory table on changing the child welfare system, they shouldn't be punished for that contribution. And the moment you go over $500, we have to issue a T4A, which ramps up their income. So to me, that's a relatively simple solution for those young people who don't necessarily want a job, but want to be compensated for their experience. The third thing I just want to say is I'm really proud to say that no job at Students' Commission is minimum wage, which is a big win for our sector, but we're definitely not at living wage.
Right.
And I feel like the miserly Grinch when some of my staff ask for their, this isn't working, and it's like, well, we've got 40 employees. If you move, then this moves, and then that's like all of a sudden $200,000 that I didn't have budgeted for the year. So we're looking at creative ways. We've invested in a unrestricted fee-for-service program line to be able to cover our costs and to be able to think about moving our wages. All of our wages at Students' Commission in Canada are above the nonprofit average. We'd like to get them closer to what folks perhaps in the corporate sector are working. And it's not over. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. The staff can stay.
You have staff in the room, do you?
We do have staff, and I don't want to be like, and I'm looking, I'm in it too, so we're in it together. We have a rule too that the highest paid person cannot make more than 3 times the lowest paid person, because we've read a lot of research that once that person is making more than the lowest paid person, they become really disconnected from their world and reality. So that's another kind of system solution we've tried to play to maintain equity. We all move up together is basically the thought.
Yeah.
So I'm obviously really passionate about this topic.
Clearly. I would say that, we've learned a lot through our partnerships supporting RBC Future Launch. First and foremost, we could not execute that program without really strong partnerships like yours and many, many others. And I would say that I think that the charitable sector is doing a really, really good job, certainly the partners that we work with, to ensure that young people are skilled up for the jobs of tomorrow. I think a major frustration for us, and I speak for the entire program team when I say this, is that we make significant progress in terms of, preparing young people, with skills and networks, practical work experience, access to mental well-being supports and services, and so on. And too often it feels like that's all sort of slowed or undone because of external factors like a non-performing economy, like being on the brink of recession, like inflation, which then creates a whole bunch of other externalities that actually put the work that we are doing as an ecosystem at risk. And yet, even with all of that, the importance of the work continues, because this will not last. Hopefully this cycle will not last. I want to pivot really quickly to the whole issue around accessing and paying for post-secondary education, which still is a barrier for way too many young Canadians. And it's sort of a double-edged sword. Either you can't afford it, or when you can afford it, whether by loans or grants or whatever, unfortunately then you can't do part-time work to ensure that you can actually continue to build those skills, to focus on studies, to manage the stress of paying bills and so on. So to the entire panel, What are your thoughts around what needs to be done to ensure that there's equitable access to post-secondary education in a way that is fair and accessible, and does not foist on young people burdens that they shouldn't have to be dealing with?
Laura passed me the mic because she knew I was going to have something to say about this. Tuition should be free for post-secondary education in Canada. This is not... Thank you. Yeah, really controversial opinion in this room, I'm sure. The thing about... So again, to go back to young people and their political power in our society, and to once again pump the tires on our U-Report digital polling platform, 83% of young people who responded to our poll on affordability said that tuition should be free, and 55% chose free education as the thing that would be most helpful to them from a long list of various things that could be done, policies that could be done. And then the other thing, because I work for UNICEF and we're constantly looking at what other countries are doing, I think it's important to say that this is not a controversial opinion to say that post-secondary education should be free. There are countries, I was speaking to some young people from Denmark, and I asked them, out of curiosity, what's tuition like for you in university? And they said, we are paid $1,000 per month by our government to go to post-secondary education. So being aware of what is possible, and not only what is possible, what's happening in different places, I think is really powerful. And being forceful in coming together again as young people and flexing your political muscle a little bit, I think is necessary on the tuition issue.
I think, and just on the flexing the political muscle, is everyone just flexing over there? Yeah. So 25% of the Canadian population is kind of in that 18 to 29 group. That's a big amount if everyone votes. We're certainly one of the group that's pushing to get the voting age dropped to 16. And also happens around the world in lots of places and lots of reason to do that. So definitely send letters to your MPs to get that done. But I think on the post-secondary education, I just think it is a mess right now on the financial side. Some of the stories that I hear from non-young people over 30 are, I had to pay when I was their age, right? I think in that comment, if we really want to balance everything out, I think you'd all be game for that, right? If we really want to do that, then let's take a look at the unemployment rate when you were a kid. Let's have a look at the cost of housing when you were young. Let's have a look at the cost of food and mobility. Let's have a look at the mental health issues when you were a young person. If you really want to balance it out, let's really go and dig into that stuff. But right now, I think I read from the Stats Canada that the universities, because of their investment portfolios, made about $3 billion during the pandemic. And did anyone get a discount out there on their education? Anyone? So I think the other, just on the last topic, was I think one of the pieces that frustrates me is that we should not treat young people as kind of charity cases. And I don't know if that's the right term or whatever, but it just feels like there's so much potential in the group, and everyone's certainly that we work with, young people want to get out there and do stuff. And I think it's almost like a change in the mental model around how we think of young people, that they're not just asking for free stuff all the time. Like they want to do stuff. And that speaks to their skills, it speaks to their attitude, which we desperately need in Canada. And I think that also comes back to the cost of education.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a young person this weekend who was lamenting the cost of paying for just tuition and how much that cost. And then, the young person sort of pivoted to say, and then there's the quote unquote nickel and diming. If you want an access pass to the school gym, it's $25. If you have a car, it's a monthly payment for your car to park. You know, the meals in the cafeteria they don't feel like they're subsidized. The list goes on and on and on. And increasingly, more and more young people are feeling despondent about the whole thing, the whole cost of post-secondary education. When you are, you know, when you come from a barriered community, that just, you know, sort of creates even more anxiety around however am I going to, you know, access post-secondary education. And as one person said to me, make my parents proud that, you know, moving us from our home country to here wasn't in vain. And those are some of the stories that you hear all the time. And so I keep thinking about what are the things that we need to do from a policy perspective to make education more affordable. Another question for all of you, and this again goes back to cost of living, whether you are a student and you're paying rent in residence, or you are in part-time work, you're not in employment or training and you're paying rent. The one thing that we know is that the range of rent for a single bedroom apartment, for example, in Lethbridge, is well below $1,000 per month, but averages nearly $2,000 in Toronto. Let's talk about housing solutions a little bit, and this is for all of us. So maybe it'd be nice to hear from Sharif as well. What solutions, you know, beyond building more properties on an accelerated timescale, what solutions can actually be put in place to address some of these concerns?
There's a few things. I mean, I think I'm just trying not to go down multiple bunny holes in my answer here.
Right.
But I think what we're experiencing right now, and I think about Jennifer and taking it global, and also the cultural immersion group and international experiences, what they were sharing. This is no longer a domestic inflation. Like, this isn't just Canada. This is a complete shifting of how the world is producing things right now is resulting in these increased costs, right? And when I read all the articles about these interest rates going up, which are actually, they are lowering housing prices, but making the cost of carrying a house more expensive. And I read that 80% of inflation is supply-driven versus demand-driven, which is getting into some real economics now. But there's actually a global solution to this. Like, there's a system-level global solution that's happening. You've got a war in Ukraine. You've got the supply chains kind of frozen in China. We've put a lot of the stuff that we make and that's on our shelves comes not from North America, but comes from outside of the Turtle Island. And there's going to be implications when the globalization starts to shift that are going to be beyond anything we can do here in Canada. So I think we have to kind of I think sometimes because we're surrounded by two oceans as a country, we sometimes forget, and we have a very interesting partner to the south. We sometimes forget about the fact that we're in a larger international context that needs to be part of the solution. I'm going to get to housing, don't worry. So, the second part to the housing solution, and one of the things that was popping into my head about this throughout the conversation is just, the quote that I shared in the speech about how this experience for a lot of young people is better than school, and just the valuing of non-traditional ways in which young people can get their skills, and seeing that just as valuable as post-secondary. When I was doing my school, I was told, everybody in my generation was told, you need to have a university degree. That's what you have to do. And now I'm trying to get an electrician, and the cost of getting an electrician is like off the charts from where it went, because the trades were seen as bad when I was going to school. Like, there are so many different ways in which we should be valuing young people's work. University is one path. Coming to an experience and being in a youth program is another path. Like, that needs to be supported. And so I think the reason, how is this connected to housing? Housing is the symptom of decisions that have been made, 3 or 4 international decisions or national decisions that we've made 4 or 5 steps earlier that require us to take a more integrated approach to it. Like building more houses is like, what did you call the healthcare system? It's actually a sick care system, an illness care system. Building more housing is like the 5th or 6th solution before the 1st or 2nd solutions that we have to take towards addressing these changes. And I talked to the group yesterday, like, I'm not just pretending like today I said this and tomorrow it's fixed, right? Like it's gonna take, like as Jennifer said, to 2040, like where do we wanna be? But we've got to stop kind of going to the reactive solutions and going to solutions that are actually addressing the system level challenges that are resulting in the symptom of
Cause and
housing.
effect.
Yeah, exactly. Housing costs being high is a symptom of so many other decisions that get ignored, and we just focus on housing, right? And there's other stuff that could be addressed to address that. So sorry if I got a bit meta on that one.
Any other thoughts on that question around cost of housing and rents and so on?
I'm not going to try and follow Sharif. That's
I just have like one thought around, and it's something that I talked about with young people this week around purchasing a home, and we heard it that it's not even on the radar for most young people to consider. And I grew up in a community where that was the expectation. You know, you grow up, you become an adult, you buy a house. But I had peers now who grew up in Toronto. That wasn't not even a consideration for them. And now, even in a city that was very affordable to buy a home, off the radar. But people are paying $2,000 a month for rent. And how are you expected to ever save a mortgage and a down payment on a home if all of your money is going into the rent? And so it goes back to the systems in terms of who qualifies for a mortgage. How do you get that? It's clear that you can pay all of your bills every month. So how is that experience translating into the capacity to buy a home? And how do we look at that in terms of those skills that people have and that equity that they've built in that apartment building into home ownership?
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to highlight one of Sharif's comments. I think housing solutions are actually healthcare solutions, or in the true sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
And in Canada, we spend 25% less on education than we do on the illness care than we used to. You know, that's a massive shift in what society says is worthwhile. So, you know, helping to rebalance that is going to be a step towards a strategy. I think we've put out publicly that we think there needs to be a national youth housing strategy in Canada. That doesn't exist right now. There is a housing strategy. It's just, you know, it's hard to find youth in the strategy, even though they're 25% of the population. So that's something that we really think we need to get going on, and hopefully everyone here will be involved in it.
Mm-hmm. A couple of more questions for the panel, and so this really sort of, you know, continues the conversation around financial wellness and the acknowledgement that financial wellness outcomes in Canada are still not equal. And after decades of effort to create gender equity, young men still continue to earn more than young women across Canada. What are some of the key solutions that we need to be thinking about to focus our attention on shrinking the income gap?
Well, keep talking.
Since you've got the mic, yes.
But I want to give you I said in the group, the affordability group, I dropped that. We looked at 27 cities, small cities, 25,000, Charlottetown, Yellowknife, big cities like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. There wasn't one city where it was equal between men and women. Not one. Just, I don't know. I'm going to pass.
Like a lot of these questions, there's so much nuances and different parts of it. So I'll speak to what I know in terms of the work that we do. And that's that women are more likely to hold minimum wage jobs. They're more likely to work in care sectors that are, again and again and again, under-resourced. When in 2019 and early 2020, I was looking for some work. I was like, oh, I could work in a daycare center. I love working with children. I would like to revisit that. Maybe that's a new career path for me, or a different way to take the average salary, average wage for a daycare worker at that time was $11.20 an hour. And this was in 2019, right? And so what does that say about how we value the work of women in our communities? That these jobs that exist are just underpaid. It's not that, we do know that people in the same job, women and men, there is a wage gap that exists. There's no denying it. The statistics show it. But we also know that in terms of where women are working, they are working in jobs that are funded by government. So our systems are devaluing the work of women in our communities by continuing to underpay them, and have these organizations like Students' Commission, like UNICEF, have to fight for funders or whoever, our governments, to raise minimum wage, to make it a livable wage, to say our workers need to be making enough money to live off of. And so many of those people in those positions are women. That's just the reality of it. They're nurses, they're healthcare aides, they're working in daycares. And I think that shapes that number quite a bit in terms of the difference between the wage gap in men and women.
You see it in the professions too, because just 2 weeks ago there was an article, I think, in one of the national newspapers talking about the lack of parity in the legal profession. So it's everywhere. And one of the concerns I have is that, one, we don't speak about it enough. I'm a big believer in what I would describe as male empathy. I recognize that I have a responsibility to my female colleagues and friends and networks to ensure that I am talking about the issues that are important to them and create disadvantages for them. But more fundamentally, too often some of the prejudices and biases that affect women increasingly are affecting others depending on how they identify. And so if we don't learn to speak up and challenge the kinds of norms and the status quo that seems to preserve a meritocracy that works for some and excludes others, then my view is that we're all complicit. And so I think we all have to find our voice and to champion these issues however and wherever we find them to ensure that we achieve parity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other pieces to that puzzle too is that when women and women presenting folks do find their way to those higher paid positions, they are held to a different standard than men in those positions. And as a result, the length of time that they stay in those positions is shorter. They're more likely to be removed from those positions. We see it in politics all the time. A political party is failing. They put in a woman comes in to be their leader, and there's maybe one term, and then they're there to clean up the mess. And then what does that say? And so, yeah, it's all. I think it's like a lot of folks have said, there's so many nuances and pieces to the puzzle. But your point to that, I think people think that there is gender equality that exists in our society, particularly when it comes to wages and salaries, and it's just not true.
Yeah.
And we do need to talk about it. And I think that we need to encourage young people to talk about how much money they're making in their positions with the people that they work with. It might be controversial in some spaces, but that's the only way to know if you are making the same wage as the person standing next to you, is to talk to the people in the room and hold those spaces accountable to meeting that standard.
Thanks, Laura. We've got a couple of more questions just before we wrap. Were you going to say something, Sharif?
I just
Okay.
have to say
Sure.
Sorry. We just need to dismantle toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And we need to learn from our Indigenous history when there was in some communities 46 different gender identities, and there's for some reason the philosophy that we have is two only, like binary. Like that's what's been imposed by colonialism. There were so many communities that never had to think about it in construct of two. like these conversations need to happen, but this is a symptom of a system level issue, which is that men's work is more valuable than women's work, and that's rooted in a history of colonialism that needs to be really dismantled and unpacked. And I think we need to think about it from that perspective. But I have so much hope in this room because of the diversity of gender identities that I've had the opportunity to meet. I wish I had this growing up in terms of like what only 20 years ago didn't exist. Like this generation is not going to stand for this woman to man. They're not even going to stand for the term woman to man. Like they're not going to stand for this pay gap thing. And we need to be allies to support you, and allies to support you in the process of dismantling this, because you're already well on your way to doing it.
Wonderful. So in our final questions, and we touched on this one just a little bit, how do you suggest we continue to collaborate with the charitable sector and corporate Canada and government to improve affordability for young people? So if I think of some of the work that we're doing through RBC Future Launch and, sort of letting our work be informed by, the needs and challenges that the sector identifies, what are some of the other things that corporate Canada in partnership with the charitable sector and government can do, like really practical things that we can do together?
I'm going to just jump in really quick and not talk so much, I promise. But RBC Future Launch is, when I think about the corporate world and I think about what you can do, like RBC Future Launch is an example that needs to be scaled to other organizations, other banks, other corporations. Like the approach of RBC Future Launch to work with us as partners, and it's been 5 years now, and it's like we're friends, like colleagues, and we worked through some stuff. Like we wouldn't have been able to come through the pandemic as a charitable organization paying above the nonprofit average without the support of funders like RBC Future Launch. So I won't, I know you're all competitive in the corporate world and stuff, but like it'd be nice if there was, I know Scotia has a program, like, if you could work together as for the, beyond just the bottom line in some ways, to have this type of funding approach and use your leverage as the largest bank to communicate that and to continue, and not just to tell them, but to like walk them through how. The how is so important. The like ability to pick up the phone, and like Natalia and I have talked like 4 or 5 times this year. It's not like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? It's like a conversation, right?
A partnership.
Yeah, it's a partnership. And and in any partnership, there's been tough moments and good moments. Like there's also honesty in the partnership, right? So I think this is a really good model, and sometimes the change, as Jennifer said, is like 20 years from now. Like what's happening here will result in a change in 2042. Don't leave yet. Like, stick with it, like, and get others on board with how you do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Robert, any thoughts? Or Terrence?
I was going to form my thoughts while you talked.
Okay, sure. Yeah, take your time, Robert. No problem. I think that Sharif hit the nail on the head. Of course, this type of work, where we come together, the people on this panel, the organizations we represent, to platform young people, I think should always be a top priority, because we keep saying young people are experts in their lives, but I think it's important to recognize that changes over time. And so the young people, as Sharif was just saying, the young people who are in the room are not the young people who were in the room 5 years ago, and they won't be the young people who are in the room 5 years from now. And that change, that dynamic of change, is so powerful, and it also is a political force for change in our society. So I think that would definitely be one thing that we can all continue to do together.
Robert?
You gave me some time, thank you. I think, using Future Launch as an example, I think RBC made a 10-year commitment, and that just doesn't happen. And I think that's one of my frustrations, is that sometimes programming and investment in the youth sector tends to be a little bit flavor of the month. someone has a kid who's this and they want to help it out. And so they convince the marketing department to give a little bit of money and then it's a one-off thing. Like, again, 25% of the population, these are people who are invested in the community, literally and figuratively. This is a group who is so critical to the work that needs to be done in the country. And it's those kinds of 10-year commitments. It's also, and I think, lots of organizations try to do this, but it's also that we've got Government of Canada logos here. We need to have Ontario government logos and provincial government logos. We need to have municipal logos. We need to have other logos all kind of in the same spaces so that we can have those deep conversations.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. Laura, any comments?
Yeah, I think to Sharif's point about supports from our existing corporate partners that are doing incredible work to support youth-serving organizations and young people is so important. But as you're having those conversations and supporting, pitching this idea of investing in young people to other businesses and other corporations, making sure that as new funding opportunities are developed, that the children and youth sector is part of those conversations, that we are at the tables to advise you and counsel you on how that funding should be delivered, how to make sure that organizations can use your dollars to the best of our abilities to make sure that we are impacting young people in the best way possible. And those voices are so critical and so often left out of those conversations, whether that's in corporate funding or government funding or foundations. No one is talking to the people who are experts at what they do in how that funding should be delivered and where it should go. And it's so critical. And organizations would love to work with more corporate partners. They are an important part of our community, like all of us are. And so how do we all continue to build that together? And I think that Sharif's point about having these great organizations, you've created a platform, a sample of how to do it. You're doing a great job. How do we translate that to other spaces while also making sure that youth-serving organizations are there, that youth are at that table in the development of those funds it needs to happen. It needs to be part of that solution as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, because at RBC, we don't pride ourselves on our ability to write a check. One could argue that, well, that's what banks should be able to do, write a check. In this day and age, it is more important that we partner with community, that we listen to the needs of community. And to Robert's point earlier, when we announced our 10-year, $500 million commitment to preparing young people for the future of work in order to fuel Canada's economic prosperity, that was informed by what youth told us that they needed. And we conducted fora across this country, 15 different youth forums across this country. And once we made our bold declaration, I will say that we didn't have every aspect of it all figured out. But increasingly, we built partnerships and we listened. We built partnerships and we listened. And we learned and we listened and we built partnerships. And all of the partnerships that we have established are in response to what the community is telling us. And I can't tell you how fulfilling that work has been, not just for me, but everyone that's part of our team. And we get to work with incredible partners like yourselves. And so I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to you guys for the work that you do. One last question, and this really links financial wellness to anxiety, or affordability to anxiety. In April of this year, we published the Youth Outlook Survey that really focused on mental well-being. One of the things that survey again reaffirmed for us, because it did 2 years ago, was that particularly among women and LGBTQS plus communities, the issue of mental health or anxiety is particularly more acute, and then particularly more so when it sort of looks at work and affordability and things like that. Any thoughts on interventions, solutions that we should be considering to more effectively support individuals who are struggling with mental health as it relates to affordability?
I just take them.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I see we often see that outcomes like mental health or like housing or even poor physical health. There's like a number of things ahead of that lead to that. Like that's an outcome that results out of some choices we've made as a society, if that makes sense. And I think we've made decisions as a society about what certain things should cost and how much we should invest in certain things that play a critical role in why affordability is creating mental health challenges for so many young people. We've made a decision not to invest in education at the same level as Robert shared. We've made decisions that we would manufacture a number of our items not in Canada because it's cheaper in some ways, but means there aren't maybe necessarily some jobs for folks here. We've made decisions to decentralize our education system so that there isn't a national approach to it. We've made decisions about how many, what types of jobs are for which types of people, right? And that, in order for Canada to be sustainable economically, we need to have a certain amount of immigrants come to the country, and there's some jobs that are just for temporary workers and not for Canadians who are here. So the point I'm trying to make is just that we have to, what we've found as a solution to address mental health beyond obviously investing in the need for mental health resources and supports and counselors and seeing mental health as valuable as physical health, is to work with young people to solve these system level challenges and to see how they can influence these system level challenges. And those solutions that they generate and they see themselves in the change actually have the unintended but intended outcome of improving mental health, if that makes sense. So mental health is like getting to that point of your mental health being so stressed by affordability is a result of 10 other decisions that you weren't a part of. So how can we involve those young people in the decisions to prevent it from getting to that point of crisis, if that makes sense? Yeah.
I like the way you framed that. Go ahead, Rob.
Is there going to be a question coming up? Like, has this conference improved your mental health? Just put your hand up, right? For the last 2, maybe 3 years, we've asked, we've asked young people to basically isolate and to help older generations. So, my question to older generations is, are you recognizing the sacrifice, or what are you going to do about it? How do you actually help young people get back on the road after their 3-year sacrifice? So I think that's, the mental health is as you're saying is the effect, not the cause. Like it's all these other things. Like if you feel like you're part of a community, you have that support. If you feel like you're isolated from everybody, that's when that anxiety really creeps in.
So the importance of community. Yeah. Laura?
I think it just goes back to so much of what we talked about. You talked about how it's higher in women and queer folks. Mm-hmm. So we talked about it. We make education free, right? Those are the solutions. We examine the gender pay gap. We look at the discrepancies in pays across sectors. Those are the solutions. People are facing mental health crises, and their emotional well-being is deteriorating often as a symptom of what's happening in our society. And all of the things that we talked about, all of the things that these incredible young people shared with us today, that is how we address the mental health crisis. And the other piece is that we have to make sure moving forward that this is not just an investment of the day, right? We so often see, when this crisis is happening, we see tons of investments in that moment into mental health, into mental well-being. That's what's going on right now. That's where investments are going. But what's going to happen in 3 years when something else is happening and something else becomes a priority, right? That investment needs to carry forward. It can't just be a point in time investment.
Yeah. Terrence, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just
Where we were at?
so on the mental health stress of the affordability issue, when you look at the data, when we ask young people about their mental health and how it relates to their financial situation, it's really interesting. I mean, it's not that interesting to say that people who are struggling with affordability of life are under mental stress. I think that's pretty self-evident. But it's interesting to see that people who are not struggling with affordability of life have worse mental health in societies where there's growing inequities between income levels. And so in a country like Canada, where we've seen growing inequality over the years, we've seen young people's reported mental health decline. And it's not just people who are struggling to make the ends meet, because that's obvious, but it's also the people who are going to school and are constantly aware that there's this whole part of their school or their society that they could become a part of if they don't continue to excel at school, and so they're skipping meals, et cetera. And so it's really a question to Robert's point about community, and it's like, what is the community that we are building, and who is and is not a part of it, and reframing the economic situation that the country is in as something that we are all in together, I think goes a long way to making people feel like they are a part of something and they're supported and there's help there if they need it.
Thanks so much.
One more.
Go ahead, Robert.
More free pizza, right?
Okay, so we are at the end of our panel discussion, but it would be remiss of me if I didn't take at least one question from the audience. And the young man in the glasses and the blue shirt, you've had your hand almost up for a while. So we'll take two questions. Yeah.
Check. Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Sajad, and first of all, it was a pleasure to be part of this amazing conference and to meet all of you amazing people. And I'm from Vancouver, and a place where it takes 40 years on average to save for a house down payment, and that's kind of the place where we come from, and it's different from coast to coast to coast. And first of all, we're glad to have RBC as a partner supporting this amazing commission, and we thank you for that. Listening to this this panel, it appears that there's a missing piece or a puzzle, in my best understanding, and which seems to be the involvement of the private sector in our future, which is also an opportunity. So this question is for you, Mark. In your best understanding, as young people, what else can we do to push the private sector to invest more in young people? That's my first question. And what more can we do to hold corporate Canada accountable? Thank you.
So a couple of thoughts. The first I would say is that your generation is perhaps the most influential generation in living memory. Your consumer power and your ability to influence, whether directly or by how the products you purchase, the organizations you do business with, where you purchase financial services, the list goes on and on and on. And then how you mobilize using social media and other tools at your disposal actually places this generation as perhaps the most influential generation ever. You have then within your power to influence how corporate organizations behave, depending on how you allocate and or spend your resources. And where corporate organizations don't listen, then it is, for you to act. And I am all for young people mobilizing and making their voice heard, making their voices heard. I will tell you, and I think I said it earlier, when we developed RBC Future Launch, it was developed in response to what young people were telling us. And for context, prior to RBC Future Launch, sure, we were investing, $50-odd million back in community year after year after year, and have been doing that, for the greater part of our history. But we were unfocused. And, I would go as far as to say it was more patriarchal than partnership. But once we took the time to listen to what our community was telling us and aligned our investments to our purpose statement of helping clients thrive and communities prosper, well, you don't decide how communities prosper. Communities tell you what they need in order to prosper. And we spent time listening. And so we suddenly weren't doing things like kids play sports anymore, or kids at risk, or kids this and kids that. Nor were we prioritizing the elite sports that well-to-do kids have the privilege of participating, like hockey and equestrian and swimming and on and on and on. We focused on the interventions that mattered to young people as identified by young people. What are they? They wanted access to job-ready networks, graduating school without knowing anyone who could actually help them transition to work. 21st century skills, really prioritizing the ability to collaborate, to communicate, critical thinking, those kinds of things that young people told us that they wanted. Access to work experiences, whether it be apprenticeships, co-ops, or internships, making sure that more kids, particularly those in the humanities, had access to internships and so on. And then finally, access to mental well-being supports and services to preserve their wellness. More and more Canadian companies, I would say corporates more broadly, need to start by listening, not start by telling. You have the power to make them listen, and I would just encourage you to do exactly that. One question over here. Yeah.
Bougie Eternity Nika Nadishina Cause, Mishi Gogamon First Nation, Treaty 9 Nindonchi, Mikanak Nindozam. Hello, I am Eternity Nika, and I am from Mishi Gogamon First Nation, Treaty 9 area, and I am a part of the Snapping Turtle Clan. I am one of 2 vice co-presidents at the Regional Multicultural Youth Council in Thunder Bay, Ontario. It was a great week for the youth have come up with the recommendations you heard, and we feel it's because the SCC provided us with a safe space to gather, share our ideas, and support each other. The challenge for most of us when we go back to our communities is to continue what we said here. We are young people with ideas, but don't have the money to act on our recommendations alone. Our question is, how can you support youth organizations, or where can we get help to create safer spaces for youth, to gather, to plan, and organize activities that will make the Canada we want?
Is that question directed at me as well, or for everyone? So I'll let Sharif answer that.
Yeah, so we're not like this part of the Canada we want is over, but the Canada we want youth movement for you for all of us begins tomorrow. And what RBC, we were founded at a youth conference. And what funders like RBC, the Government of Canada, and others have allowed us to do is to turn this week-long conference into a youth movement, which is really exciting. So there are 4 or 5 different ways that you can continue to be engaged. And actually part of our RBC Future Launch is to support some funding within communities to continue your work. And one of them is to be part of we have a program called The Art of Work, which is a paid youth employment program that we offer organizations to hire young people to take change in their community. Another program is called our sift through all these different activities to figure out how to support your mental health. We also have a facilitator roster that meets monthly and brings people together from different communities to take action on the change. We have another conference in January, then another one in March, and then another one in October of next year. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can take the national to local. And one of the roles that we want to play at Students' Commission of Canada is to help you connect and convene as much as we can and talk to partners and funders about getting you the support that you need. So just wanted you to let you know that we're not done after today. Today's like the start of the journey, if that makes sense. Look at Jennifer. She's still on the journey.
Can I just give a quick shout out to Jennifer? Because one of the ideas that she had, I mean, she's such a huge, 7,000 projects, more than $7 million. I mean, that's an enormous amount of combined effort towards great youth projects. I think the idea of micro grants is exactly what you're looking for just to get started. And it's hard to find where those grants are. Some of them probably go even undelivered every year because we don't know where they are, like scholarships and other things. So I know in talking with Jen last week, that's one of her passions is let's create a little bit of a database that everyone can have access to figure out where all those little, $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 grants can be accessible so that you can get those projects off the ground in Thunder Bay and other places around Canada.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Sharif. I will say just in closing that one of the things that we are really sort of humbled by through RBC Future Launch is that since we launched the program in 2017, almost 4 million young Canadians have benefited from programs funded by RBC Future Launch. And just under 80% of young people when surveyed tell us that they feel better prepared for the future of work. The trick for us then is to think about how do we, to your question, think about how do we effectively network Canadian youth across the country. We haven't figured that out yet, but we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to do it, because it's through that movement and that connectedness that we begin to sustain engagement and ensure that you feel equipped to go back to your communities wherever home is for you, to remain in the conversation, to be part of this movement, and really to be driving toward the Canada that, not just what the Canada we want, but the Canada that we need. And so with that, I just want to say thank you to Robert Bernard, the co-founder of Youthful Cities, to Laura Cathler, Executive Director, the National Alliance on Children and Youth, Sharif Mahadi, Executive Director, Students Commission, and of course Terrence Hamilton, who is the Director of the Domestic Policy Specialist for UNICEF.
You give me a promotion?
Thank you all for a stirring conversation today, and thank you for being such a great audience. So thank you so very much.